What's been right about that?
ICE.
Ukraine, you've been making progress towards a peace deal, but I don't know if you know this, but Lindsey Graham and Mike Pompeo were there on the ground in Ukraine, seemingly doing the opposite, trying to provoke the Ukrainians to keep fighting. What do you think of that?
Well, we're going to see, and people have to be very careful with what they say. They got to be very careful with their mouth, because their mouth can get them into a lot of trouble.
Hey gang, it's me, Dr. Steve. I hope you're enjoying the beginning of a lovely weekend, but I can tell you who's not. And that is the neocon rhino warmonger Lindsey Graham. Now, you just heard President Trump give him a major warning for the trip he took several weeks back to Ukraine, just literally hours before Ukraine hit Russian targets thousands of miles inland with a covert drone strike that clearly escalated the conflict that Trump is trying to get resolved. By the way, in view of that, Pakistan has just nominated Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. Did you hear about this? Nuclear-armed Pakistan. This is huge because it suggests that regional powers are seeing the very real possibility of a peaceful resolution to this conflict in the Middle East. But now looking over to Ukraine and Trump's warning to the neocons like Lindsey Graham, this is huge. What you just heard there represents far more than just partisan bickering. What Trump just said put a lid on Lindsey Graham's compulsive need to destroy any potential rival to a unipolar world that simply no longer exists. What we have to understand is that the neoconservative project is embodied by figures like Graham, derives its power from what we might call an eternal enemy complex. So this is the psychological need to constantly manufacture and fabricate existential threats to justify permanent warfare in such a way that expands American power abroad while enriching the military-industrial complex here at home. So this explains why Graham has spent 30 years in office promoting interventions that have never made Americans freer or more prosperous, but have consistently enriched his own donors. Now, by contrast, Trump's foreign policy philosophy represents what we might call continental realism. Continental realism is an approach that prioritizes national sovereignty, bilateral relationships, and strategic restraint over and against global hegemonic ambitions. It's often referred to as Jacksonian foreign policy, and Trump's critique of NATO is obsolete and his preference for bilateral over multilateral deals reflect a deep understanding that the unipolar moment, the 3 decades in which America was the sole superpower, hence unipolar, that historical moment has ended. So when Trump negotiates with Putin or seeks diplomatic solutions to regional conflicts, he demonstrates his recognition that we are now in a multipolar world, a world composed of multiple civilizational poles rather than a single hegemon dominating subordinate vassals. The genius of Trump's approach lies in his recognition that America's true strength comes not from military interventions, but from its position as what we might term a sovereign civilizational pole. His neo-mercantilist trade policies and immigration restrictions reflect the understanding that national sovereignty requires control over both economic flows and demographic composition. Again, this stands in direct opposition to what Lindsey Graham and the neocons have been advocating for decades, which is in effect a borderless commercial empire that's hollowed out American manufacturing, displaced American workers, all the while leaving our borders wide open for cheap labor, bought and paid for by their political donors. So this is why I think Matt Walsh, I think it was Matt who recently said that Graham he's basically been a warmongering a-hole, who's been in power for 30 years and never done a single thing to make life better for a single American. Not a single freaking thing, again, except his donors. His only reason for being in office is to expand American political influence abroad, all the while enriching his military investment donors. And what you just heard there is Trump making it very clear those days are over. And I'm very glad to hear that comment about Graham and Ukraine, because I think it has enormous implications for Trump's policy towards the Middle East and particularly Iran. Again, we'll have to see, but the abject failure of neocon interventions from Iraq to Libya to Syria has demonstrated the bankruptcy of the unipolar project. And Trump's triumph of America First policies reflects the understanding that genuine national strength requires internal development rather than external expansion. This aligns with the multipolar principle that each civilization should focus on perfecting its own internal order rather than imposing its values on others. So Trump has just made it very clear to Lindsey Graham that he'd better get in line with the new America First civilizationalism, because as he just said, if Graham don't, that can get him into a lot of trouble. Love you guys. Have a wonderful weekend.